Hello, everyone. Hello, hello. Hi, good evening. If you may invite you to stand as we invite the presence of God in this afternoon's experience. The Lord is our rock, our fortress, and our deliverer. Our God is our rock, in whom we take refuge, our shield, and the horn of our salvation, our stronghold. Loving God, we thank you, we praise you, we honor you. We worship you as we come in adoration to you for your sons and daughters, celebrating worth and work, acknowledging effort. And so, God, as we gather from all nations, we invite your presence and your power to lead this evening's proceedings. May we together as your people found you, may we find you, may we continue to honor you. Lead, direct in this we pray, now and forevermore. Amen. Be seated, please.
Good evening. My first order of business is to ask all of you to turn off any device that would make sound. We are recording this for posterity, and there are many people across the country who wish they could be here tonight, who will be fortunate enough to see the recording of this event. In that order, I want to thank Alex Gimfane, our videographer this evening, who's going to make that possible. And all of you in attendance will have the opportunity to view that. Once it's posted, we'll send you an email. So this space, as Pastor Campbell said, is a fortress and a rock. It is, in many cases, ground zero for African American history in Providence. This is a space where Ciceretta Jones, the first black opera diva who grew up across the street, and when she retired lived just below Prospect Terrace, and she came in retirement to sing with this choir. This is the place where Raymond T. Jackson was groomed as a classical pianist. And when we celebrated 150 years of Ciceretta Jones's life, he returned to this church to share his gifts with us. This is a space that we know Rudolph Fisher's father preached in the late 1890s and early 1900s. This is a homecoming space for so many of us. You assembled here are a beloved community. The work that we do at Stages of Freedom, and my name is Robb Dimmick, I'm half of Stages of Freedom along with Ray Rickman, whom you'll meet shortly, is about building bridges across the racial divide. And that becomes increasingly more challenging as we face the next 4 years in an effort to divide us. So I want to first thank Reverend Campbell and an extraordinary young woman who, without her assistance, would not have made this possible, and that's Seyu Campbell. Is she in the house? Seyu, please stand. Seyu Cooper is the admin here. She's also an extraordinary artist, and I'm delighted to have been able to work with you on this project, and thank you for making it happen. Our two missions at Stages of Freedom are to teach BIPOC children how to swim. They sadly drown 5.5 times more often than their white counterparts, and to elevate and celebrate, as we are tonight, the extraordinary excellence and accomplishments of African Americans in Rhode Island. I want to acknowledge our board members who you'll meet shortly, but if any Stages of Freedom board members would please stand. Connie, Cheryl, Rafael, I don't know if Miguel is here this evening. Please give them a round of applause. Anyone associated with Classical High School, and you met 3 young men as you came in who represent Classical High School, but I know that we have alumni here. Would you please stand? This is an important reference point because Rudolph Fisher attended Classical High School. Rudolph Fisher rose to the highest levels of academics as a student. Graduating in 1915, he sat on the yearbook committee. By the time he graduated, he spoke fluent German. While others were studying Latin, he said, no, I'm studying German. And so those who stood just a moment ago stand on Rudolph Fisher's shoulders. And we have a commitment from Classical High School to validate and recognize Rudolph Fisher's extraordinary presence in that school in the coming months. So again, a round of applause for our classical students and alumni. Anyone associated with Brown University, please stand. Rudolph Fisher graduated in 1919 at the top of his class. He was valedictorian, and he did a double major, which we believe may have been the first student, black or white, to have done so. You'll learn more about him on the back of your program and also on our website devoted to Rudolph Fisher. Those who stood from Brown University, again, stand on his shoulders. He went on to accomplish in 1 year a master's and then went to Howard, where he became a doctor, and his specialty was radiology, which sadly at the age of 37 took his life. But in that narrow window of time, the things this man accomplished were extraordinary. And tonight is about illuminating some of those remarkable gifts. He wrote short stories. He wrote 2 novels. He invented the black detective novel. This, during the Harlem Renaissance, while he is a full-time doctor. That's an exceptional and extraordinary amount of energy and dedication. So you will learn about one of his short stories, which will be beautifully read. He was one of the few and first African Americans during the Harlem Renaissance to be published in white journals and periodicals. And the story you'll hear tonight, Ezekiel, was one of those stories written in the Red Cross magazine that was published for children. I want to thank so many people that make this event possible. First of all, the Rhode Island State Council on the Arts. Secondly, the Council for the Humanities, and I'd like please to acknowledge Elizabeth Francis, if you please stand. I don't know how many of you may or may not know that the humanities across the state of America have been defunded. And that is to say that they have sucked the air out of our cultural heritage, the opportunities for thousands of us to speak and tell these stories to millions of people. And so the presence of Elizabeth Francis and the work that she's done, the yeoman tasks that she has accomplished during her tenure and will continue to do during this dreadful 4 years cannot be underappreciated. Thank you, Elizabeth. I want to thank the Providence Shelter, the National Trust for Historic Preservation, Iona Dobbins Art Fund, the Rhode Island Foundation for Community Gifts, and Brown University's President, Christina Paxson, who made it possible for our special guest tonight to be here and to have quite stunning accommodations at the Beatrice Hotel. And lastly, I want to recognize a dear friend of ours who really kicked off this year-long examination of Rudolph Fisher, and that's Kate Woodhouse at the Providence Athenaeum, where we held, we believe, the first exhibit ever to be done on Rudolph Fisher, and it attracted people as far away as Virginia. People came from Virginia to see that exhibit, which was only up for 2 weeks. Kate Woodhouse, please stand. Thank you. And so the program will flow without any interruption. But before doing so, I want to acknowledge Professor John A. McCluskey, Jr., a distinguished educator and author, Professor Emeritus at Indiana University, Bloomington. He is, in our estimation, the foremost scholar on Rudolph Fisher. He did an extraordinary, marvelous introduction to City of Refuge, the collected short stories of Rudolph Fisher, spent a lot of time here in Providence, particularly at the Hay Library at Brown University, really digging into his life. And we're thrilled that he will be able to share that story with us tonight. So even before he speaks, please welcome Professor McCluskey. And now I introduce to you our board members, Cheryl Jordan and Constance Jordan.
We always come up together. It's who we are. So I'm Cheryl Jordan, and I'm the president. And I'm the oldest.
But not by much.
If you're not familiar with Stages of Freedom's work within the community, I want to just give you a little description of what Stages of Freedom has done surrounding how their organization has come to be formed. I start by giving honor to the historical record. Oftentimes, history is portrayed on the big screen. It's kind of action-packed. And sometimes it's misappropriation of the cultural dynamics that surround how things occurred. Stages of Freedom has dedicated itself to building community and advancing racial equity through the arts and humanities. This is done by creating programming that illuminates and celebrates Black Rhode Island's culture and the heritage that's already here. And that's one of the most important things to remember. And it's shared with a large and diverse audience. As you look around you, it's not just a room of people who owe their heritage to the slave, but it's people who have come to our country from around the world. And so we can't just say it's one group of people. And the people who are already here. Should always make sure I get that right. Stages of Freedom's programming, second, elevates the empowerment of youth. Our youth need workshops, and they need access to our cultural opportunities. If you were a child growing up when I did, you regularly went to the theater, you went to the symphony, you went to many cultural activities that were provided for you. And these things now are under threat. Everyone should have access to our museums. Everyone should have access to our musical, our libraries. These things cannot be lost. Stages of Freedom also was formed to provide youth of color with swimming lessons. Now, this seems kind of strange, but actually, the high level of people who have drowned, who are African American, is on a high that is so high, it's one of three ways in which our youth are actually killed. And as a result, we're now trying to ensure that we take that away. Many of us grew up with the ability to go to swimming lessons. I was shocked to find out that that avenue was being obstructed. And Stages of Freedom has taken on that along with its collaboration with the YMCAs of Greater Rhode Island. The background of the organization is it came to be in 2016. It's an award-winning nonprofit. Its core is addressing the racial inequalities in Rhode Island and ensuring, as Black lives do matter, and it is something that people have to think about, we can do it through the preservation of the historical record, and we can show ourselves dedicated to understanding why history is actually important. So one of the things they're doing is, of course, we do provide swimming lessons for our children, and also we let other people come too. Because as many people know, African Americans never close the door on someone else. They allow everyone to come with us when there is a need, and we dedicate ourselves to that. We also provide what we call esteem workshops. So we've done black bow ties for boys, and we've done the girls' tea party. And we've done Jazz as a Rainbow. In fact, Jazz as a Rainbow, when it first started, Connie and I were sneaking out of our corporate jobs to see it. We remember leaving early and going to the West End, I think, to actually see one of the first performances of it. We would later bring our parents, a few years later, to see a performance too. It was dynamic and it was wonderful, and the children learning about the heritage of Rhode Island's jazz was fantastic. The Museum of Rhode Island African American History, our nonprofit bookshop, is now providing proceeds to help with our swimming empowerment program. And it's also dedicated to people coming and seeing. You can pick the books you want. You can see other things that people have given to us that reflect the people who live in Rhode Island. It's not unusual for Ray and Robb to get a call as people leave their collections behind as they move on and give us the opportunity to use that and to sell it in the bookshop and provide for the activities that they have developed. The other thing is Environmental Justice has a tree planting initiative in South Providence. As many of you probably know from climate issues and environmental issues, our cities have been left with a not realizing that by planting, growing, and nurturing our landscape, we're actually sealing our fate to literally be burned alive in our own streets and buildings. And so this is something that has become very important. I never knew that until, well, quite recently, but now I understand the need to protect our public parks and lands. So there we have it. The last thing I'll tell you about, and then Con gets to have her share, we also have a way for all of you to stay connected. And Connie is going to talk about staying connected. Thank you.
I'm Connie Jordan. I'm treasurer of Stages of Freedom, and there are many ways that you can stay connected with Stages of Freedom, and there are lots of benefits to staying connected. Stages of Freedom has a great website. If you haven't gone there, it's stagesoffreedom.org. So I invite you to go and check that out. Currently, they're featuring a few things on the homepage. Their newest exhibit, From Slaves to Soldiers, is at the Providence City Hall on the 3rd floor. So if you have a chance, please stop by. There's also On the Road to Freedom, a roadside guide to African American sites in Rhode Island. So, please visit the website and check that out. There's also Disappearing Ink, a bibliography of writings by and about Rhode Island African Americans. So please, you can see that also on the website. And Stages of Freedom has been included in the kayak, the Providence Travel Guide. So hopefully you'll have a chance to look at that. And One of the biggest ways you can stay connected, if you have not already been connected, is to sign up for our electronic newsletter. It's called Connected. It comes out Monday through Friday and lands right in your email box. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to go to your mailbox. It comes right in. And there are themes each month. This month, it's Jazz Appreciation Month, so check that out. January was a month on civil rights. We profiled heroes, black and white, known and overlooked, who made the civil rights movement happen. In February, we were celebrating Black History Month by saluting African American luminaries born each day in February. In March, we were celebrating Women's History Month. Can't wait to see what they're going to do for May. So, if you haven't already, you can sign up on our website, and please, don't forget to stay connected. Thank you.
Rhode Island's most famous author is named Lovecraft, an extraordinarily hateful person with great talent and hate. Can you imagine that that's our writer? People come from Lithuania and Latvia, and Poland, 8,000 or 9,000 a year to celebrate him. We would like one day, Benny, one day that people will show up here as they did for the exhibit from Maryland and Delaware and whatever to celebrate Rudolph Fisher. Now, how do you do that? First, you have to tell them who Rudolph Fisher is. An extraordinary man. Really. And I want to remind you, because Americans have no memory whatsoever. They can't remember Mrs. Roosevelt. So how are they going to remember Rudolph Fisher? Can you imagine he walked through this door, Harold. His father was a minister in this church, and Rudolph Fisher was in this church. So what do we do to create memory? You put a big plaque, like we've done for Sister Retta Jones, and you put it on College Street, right next to the Rockefeller Library. We want a committee of 25 people to write to the president of Brown on June 1st, saying, this should be your favorite literary son. And we'd like this big plaque. And Stages of Freedom will pay for it. You just have to give us this much land. That's all the land you need. You put the 10-foot pole in there. You only need that much land, Madam President. You see how simple that is? And then thousands of people come up that road and see it. And at graduation every year, they will see that plaque as they go down in tradition and realize how great this person was. Now, I'm going to tell you this, and it sounds like I'm a little off, but I'm not. J. Saunders Redding, first black person ever to be a college professor at an Ivy League school. They practice racial and gender discrimination. Yes, Brown did. And he comes all the schools at the same time, go raid Howard and Morehouse and whatever, to get the very best black professor in the world to come to their school, Harvard and Dartmouth and they all. And Charlie Nichols and others are all invited. Just one. Each of these universities can only have one black person. And J. Saunders Redding comes to Brown. And I had the privilege in 1980 to sit at the Brown Gate and talk to him for 90 minutes. Almost as great as Du Bois. Not as great, because no one was. But I sat there and talked to him for 90 minutes. And you realize, going back, what this city and that university was like in 1919. Brutal, racist, and he was at the top of his class. I want you to hear this so that you'll think about committing yourself to helping Stages of Freedom. J. Saunders Redding came on the train. We had trains then, lots of trains, and he came on the train to Providence. And he arrives at the old train station, Rhode Island Foundation today, and he gets off the train, and up walks a man that he never met. And the man announces to J. Saunders Redding, a 17-year-old, I am the president of Brown University. And there is another train in an hour going south back to Delaware. And you are to be on it. Here is your ticket. And he says, no, I'm on my way up the hill for my freshman year at Brown. And the president of Brown announces to him that they've made a mistake. And he pauses for a second thinking, how can my admissions be a mistake? He says, Brown can only have 4 black students at a time, and you would be 5. And we cannot have 5 black students at the same time. Are you listening? This is the world in which we live, in which Rudolph Fisher created his greatness. And J. Saunders Redding says to the President Brown, let me call my father, the civil rights lawyer of Delaware. And he does. And the father says, put the president on the phone. And he says, I'm going to sue you and the university and your admissions officer. You do not admit my son and then turn him away because you're a racist. President Brown said, I'm not a racist. We just can only have a few blacks at a time. That's not racism. I'll see you in court. We have to remember this. There are no black doctors. There's only one black lawyer. There's no black professionals. And Rudolph Fisher creates himself. This is a place where you're lucky you're a doorman at the hotel if you're black. That's a job. Generally, you just piece something together and make a way out of no way. We're going to elevate Rudolph Fisher with your help. Vinny, I want you to be one of our 25 committee members because Brown respects you. Okay. And anyone else who'd like to, I'd like you to do that. Mr. Metz, this is his church. I'd like you to be one of our 25 committee members. You don't have to do anything. I'll do all the work. You put your name on the paper. The president of Brown is going to do it anyway, I think. Did you hear everything I said? How hard and difficult and the magic of Rudolph Fisher. He's going to have the plaque. Classical is going to come alive and acknowledge him. I thank you for coming.
an accomplished musician. Rudolph Fisher loved jazz. The summer after his college graduation, 1919, he met Paul Robeson. One roamer runs heady bass from his chest, up his throat, out his mouth. Paul. Paul. Now, beside the singing man sits a tall fellow, well-featured, too, well-muscled, fine-looking man. Occasionally he smiles, full, joins Paul for a verse, joins Paul for a laugh. Oh, his laugh, it fills both men with bellied warmth. Paul sings the music. The other arranges the music. The other laughs. Rudolph Bud Fisher. Bud met Paul at, quote, 4 Negro commencement speakers, close quote. The Carlton YMCA in Brooklyn swung and swayed with the black audience members, middle-class folk finding their seats. One by one, each boy embraced the podium and delivered his university commencement speech. Fisher, his The Emancipation of Science. Before this second audience, hands clapped. And later, a local black newspaper remarked on, quote, the efficiency that race is capable of attaining, close quote, through the, quote, broad-mindedness of the leading white colleges in the East in admitting colored students, close quote. After the speeches, 2 of the 4 Negro commencement white college colored students clapped and clasped arms. Congratulations, compliments. The 2 boys breathed in deeply. Another man who understood. Fisher, Brown University with 22, Paul Robeson, Rutgers University, 21. And both claimed clergymen as fathers, and now white institutions as alma maters. Promises were made. You got my word to stay in touch. And weeks later, Bud and Paul set out on a tour to the East Coast as a band, a crack at raising tuition funds through song and spirit. In 1929, Rudolph Fisher worked with Paul Robeson, who was himself to achieve international fame as a singer and an actor, composing songs and making arrangements for Robeson's premier New York concert. And here is Paul Robeson singing Shenandoah.
Away since last I see thee. Away, O Roland River, 'tis 7 long years since last I see thee. Away, I'm bound to go. Cross the wide Missouri. Shenandoah, I long to hear you. Away, O Roland River. Oh, Shenandoah, I long to hear you. Away, I'm bound to go. Cross the wide
It was Ezekiel's first day in Harlem, the, quote, Negro colony in New York City. He had arrived the night before after a long trip from Waxhaw, Georgia, where the dozen years of his life up to now had been spent. But last night, he had been unable to see anything clearly. The enormous Pennsylvania Railroad station, the multitude of hurrying people, the terrifying subway trains, the heavy traffic of the streets, the glittering clusters of electric lights, all had been too much for him to appreciate so suddenly. He had been able only to stare and blink and gasp. Now, however, the bright sunlight of the calmer morning allowed him somewhat to gather his bearings and observe the strange new place with less bewilderment. He was seated on the front stoop of a tall apartment house on 135th Street. His uncle, to whom he had been sent so that he might attend the excellent New York City school system, had brought Ezekiel downstairs. He was to wait there on the stoop until his uncle returned. Ezekiel had promised faithfully to stay, and so now he sat and looked about him. A little way down the street, 2 boys were playing an odd game on the sidewalk. How they laughed and chattered as they played. With a curiosity he could not resist, Ezekiel slipped down off the stoop and slowly moved towards the 2 boys. Trained as he was to the strictest obedience, he hesitated once or twice with a wave of guilt. He knew he ought to stay on the stoop, but the new interest conquered his conscience and led him farther away, until, in a few moments, he was standing by the 2 boys. He saw that they were playing with little round metal caps off soda pop bottles. They took turns, kneeling and shooting the caps by flicking out a finger and striking them, sending them sliding in a desired direction. On the sidewalk, a number of chalk lines had been drawn to form squares, and the game seemed to depend on how the caps were shot into the squares. Ezekiel watched a while. The two boys paid no attention to him. So absorbed were they in the game and each other. The two were evidently the very best of friends. Soon, the light one made a winning shot and looked up at Ezekiel with a grin so proud and so friendly that the newcomer from the south lost some of his shyness. "What do you call that game?" he asked. "Lodi," said the winner promptly. "Ever play it?" "No," said Ezekiel. The two Harlem boys were only too glad to show the stranger how to play. Ezekiel was an apt and grateful pupil, and 3 players made a better game than 2. Before long, they were having a marvelous time, laughing, shooting, arguing, explaining, shooting, and laughing again.
Suddenly, there was a clamor of bells directly across the street from where they were playing, and the roaring of a mighty engine, and an abrupt, ear-piercing shriek that frightened Ezekiel almost out of his wits. The game stopped. The other 2 boys became highly excited. "Fire!" they shouted. "Wonder where it is." Thereupon, before Ezekiel's startled eyes, appeared the most amazing thing he had ever seen. Out of the wide entrance of one of the low buildings across the street came a raging, demon-like machine straight toward them. Ezekiel stood rooted to the spot, expecting to be destroyed. But the machine, when halfway to them, turned in some miraculous fashion and started away up the street. It was red and silver in the sun. It had long, yellow wooden ladders along its sides and 2 drivers, one in front and one high on top of the ladder behind. It seemed as long as the subway train on which Ezekiel had ridden last night, and it made infinitely more speed and noise. Even after it had turned the distant corner and disappeared, the scream of its whistles came back shrill and clear. Other fire engines soon were heard at a distance and were seen passing the corner where the first had turned. Then the boys noted that people were running toward an invisible point somewhere near that corner. And at that point, the clamor of engines seemed quite suddenly to cease. Immediately, their excitement became greater. "It's on the avenue. Must be right around the corner. Come on! Come on! Let's go!" Off they sped, the 3 of them, in the wake of the hook and ladder. But as Ezekiel passed the stoop where he had promised his uncle to remain, he halted. "Hurry up! Come on!" called his new friends, outdistancing him. "Come on, boy!" For a moment, the impulse to follow them was almost too great to resist. Then Ezekiel saw that they were already too far ahead of him now Anyway, he could not possibly catch up with him.
Sadly, he returned to his stoop and dejectedly resumed his seat. What would they think of him after they had accepted him as one of them, lent him a lodi, and taught him to play their game? What would they think when he had unaccountably deserted him? Them. It was quite plain what they would think. They would think him a coward. They would never take him back as one of them. They would demand their lodi and never play with him again. What would be left for him then? Why, he wouldn't dare show his face in the street. He would have to spend all his play hours indoors, lest he be pointed out to other boys and girls as a coward. Perhaps he wouldn't even dare go to school. After having traveled so far to do so, his schoolmates would avoid him. No one would associate with a coward. Yes, he would have to spend his time in his uncle's apartment upstairs. Nothing would be more awful staring down from lonely windows into the street, a dizzy distance below, or staring into the air shaft, that horrible channel that separated one tall house from the next. A place full of unpleasant noises and odors, one glance into which this morning had been quite enough for him. Ezekiel felt like crying. Why hadn't he had the courage to go on? Was he afraid of being lost? The boys would have shown him the way back. He need not have feared that. Then why hadn't he stuck by them? A long time he sat there, downheartedly, certain that his obedience to his uncle had brought him sorrow. He wondered if his uncle could play lodi. But nobody's uncle would kneel down on a sidewalk to shoot a lodi. Presently he became aware that fire engine noises were again in the air, and in another moment the hook and ladder machine reappeared, heading back for its station. As he watched it swing around and slowly back into the engine house, he wondered what manner of machines these were that could put out a fire so quickly with ladders. Then a tremor of fear shot through him as he saw the two boys returning. They would ridicule him, call him coward. They might dare him to fight. Truly enough, they did laugh when they saw him. But to his great astonishment, it was not a laugh of ridicule, but of admiration. And when he heard what they said, he heaved a great sigh of relief and joy. "Boy, you did right," said the darker lad. "Indeed you did," said the light one. "You've got plenty of sense. It was only a false alarm." Come on, let's play Rhode.
Good evening. The word has gone out a couple times, Paul Robeson's name, and the humor, as you'll see, and you'll see a little bit more in just a second. But one overarching thing I can say about Rudolph Fisher is that he loved friendship. And he got that into his stories at a time when you didn't see much friendship in the characters of American fiction. You see solitary African-American males who are on the run, but you don't see friendship. And he and Robeson and Fritz Pollard were friends to the end. So let me start. I'm going to change my introduction just a little bit and give you a little bit of the three men at a young time. I started the expanded edition this way. The story goes that in a taxi traveling from Brooklyn to Manhattan one night in the early 1920s sat Edwin Coates, Frank Turner, Paul Robeson, and Rudolph Fisher, respectively a future educator, an educator administrator, an active singer activist, and a physician writer. So already we're talking about Renaissance men. They can do and wear different kinds of hats, each one of them. All the passengers were black and young, so was the driver. The weather was foul, windy, raining heavily, and the cab made several fishtailing stops. As the cab roared off from one of these breath stealers, Robeson leaned forward and cautioned the driver, his bass voice cutting through the groan of the cab's motor with the solemnity of a foghorn. Driver, do be careful. If anything happens to us, you will set the race back 3 generations. Then he sat back chuckling. The driver got the message and, perhaps counting himself among such proud company, eased up on the accelerator. Despite his anonymity, he deserves our appreciation today for his newfound caution. Gay for the cab driver. I got started on Rudolph Fisher in a couple of ways. The first one was that I used to, in my classes, teach the Harlem Renaissance, and after a while I began to change directions, perspective. And everybody defined it from 1918 to 1932. And of course, I taught it the same way. And we know that a depression, an assassination, doesn't kill an idea. So the idea can go forward and forward and forward. And Rudolph Fisher played a big role in doing so in his achievements. And so I would hear the words McKay, Cullen, Hughes, Hurston, and it sounds like a law firm. You know, it just came off the tongue, and we had those names, and Fisher's name would always be in it, but no one could say what he actually did and wrote. And my first introduction was watching King Solomon Gillis emerge from the bowels of the New York subways, come to a Harlem intersection, look up and saw the biggest cop he's ever seen, who was black. His name is Sam Battle. He was the first black policeman in New York City. And King Solomon Gillis saw him in a story called City Refuge, stopping cars, directing traffic. And from rural Georgia, he had never seen a black man stop cars, stop white drivers, doing what he tells them to do. And he was in almost a Disney World at that point. The next point was Disney World was when he saw a woman walking in green stockings. So those two images sort of carried the story, for him. Rudolph Fisher was a prophet in many ways. How do you find a home when you've been moving from one place to the other? And as we speak this evening, thousands of people on this planet are going from one part of the world to another for different reasons. And there was the Great Migration when he was there during the Harlem Renaissance, of many people coming from the rural South to Cleveland, to Chicago, New York, Boston, and coming in waves and waves and waves. And what Fisher was wondering is, what do you give up when you move? How do you make a home in the new place? And the route that he gave it was through humor. And he loved African-American people. He knew about some weaknesses of behavior on some people, maybe, this is not a collective statement that I'm making now. But he could see some faults, and he would write those down. But the fact is, he also realized that until this group moves forward and comes together, there won't be anything as an African-American culture nationally. So the step was, how do you pass the wisdom down? And he passed the wisdom down many times in stories. We live in stories, all of us live in stories. We have a story from behind us and a story we want to achieve in front of us. And he, in his pieces, would slip that little kernel, I'm trying to get to, into the piece. And it'll be weeks later when you walk around and say, now I got it. Now I got what he was trying to say. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit in my story and come back to some other things, but when King Solomon Gillis comes out of the subway, he's met by a friend, a person who's lived in the same village in North Carolina. And this friend befriends him. And when you're in a strange city, you're warned, at least I was years ago, maybe you too. If you get in a big city, New York and Chicago, be careful. Be at 360 degrees when you're walking down the street. Don't trust strangers, okay? He did not abide by that, even though he was on the run. So he's looking for a place to stay. He's in Harlem, King Solomon Gillis. And his friend says, see that second corner? Turn to the left when you get there. Number 45 is about halfway down the block. He's looking for a rooming house. And King Solomon says, thank you, sir. And the man asks him, you from Massachusetts? No, sir, North Carolina. Is that so? You look like a northerner. Be with us long till I die, grinned the flat King Solomon. Stopping there, reckon I is. Man in Washington I'd find lodging in this address. Now that's the first story that he had published. It won a prestigious prize. He's in medical school, writes his first story, and it's published in a major magazine, American magazine, right? This is one of his last ones. And this is Miss Cynthia. Okay. Miss Cynthia's from Georgia also. Miss Cynthia's an elderly woman. She gets off the train, and a young man, a red cap, comes up to her to help her out. She looks feeble, or to his mind, she should be feeble, but she's not feeble, right? So he comes up and he says, the biggest red cap of all was smiling at her. He looked for all the world like Dr. Crimshaw's oldest son back home. Her little brown face relaxed. She smiled back at him. They got to be, you all done took all the others. He laughed and then, carry him for you? She contemplated his bulk, his size. Reckon you could manage it? Puny little fellow like you. So she's joking already, right? So already the tone has changed. His last story, right? I mean, in a very short time, he's matured to find this other side of the newcomer to the city. But this is the one that I like. Thereupon they were friends, still grinning broadly. He surrounded himself with her impedimenta. The enormous brown extension case on one shoulder, the big straw suitcase in the opposite hand, the carpet bag under one arm, she herself held fast to the umbrella. I always like to have something in my hand when I walk. Can't never tell when you run across a snake. There aren't any snakes in the city, the boy says. There's snakes everywhere, child. Now, the difference between her and King Solomon Gillis is a gulf, is a Grand Canyon. And what he's trying to do is to see on the far end how eventually, in the course of this story, she gives wisdom to her young charge, who is an entertainer. So the big question is, what language can she find to convince him that they're on the same wavelength? I'll use the word intergenerational to say the best language is the one that can bring old and young together, okay? The old can give the wisdom. The young, they tell us, has the strength. They need other to move a group forward. And I think quiet as it's kept, that was what he was doing. It starts with the language. How do you sit down and tell a story and pass it along? That's part of it. The other part is, how does the older person become active? Because we usually think of elderly wisdom, the person sitting on the front porch with lemonade, right? And just passing wisdom off, and that's the end of that story. It wasn't enough for Fisher. He wanted to say, okay, how do you get in the game yourself? And so he has a short story called Lindy Hop, where the elderly woman is trying to help her, I think it was her granddaughter, from getting into trouble. And she's trying to woo her back from this one young man. And what she does is she practices. This woman was in her 70s. And somehow she bumps the man off and she dances and they win the prize, she and her charge. And he said, and she almost faints at the end, okay? Miss Cynthia, at the end of this particular story I've just read to you, what happens with her is that she goes to a entertainment situation and she talks to her charge, and then she dances a little bit, but reminds him of a song that they shared back in the day. So the language blink is highly political when you think about it, because it's a cultural decision in some ways, but how do you get the old and the young? How do you get the North and the South? How do you get the past and the present together, married, for any kind of movement, social, political, or otherwise? And I think that was the kind of magic that he was after. He would bring, I think, I'm convinced, in his last two stories, his science and his fiction together. His last senior year, he had 3 biology classes and a class in astronomy, straight A's. He goes to Howard University, does some research, essentially, is trained as a physician, and that goes well. But how do you get a passage I'm going to read now when he's 22 years old to where he was going to be at the end of his career with the detective story? The detective story is the perfect blend of the Renaissance man who was a researcher, a physician, a radiology expert. Okay, how do you bring that together with the Harlem streets and solving the problem of a murder? So I'm going back, and the language will sound very stilted, but he's 22 years old, first in his class nearly, and talking. And his good buddy, Paul Robeson, has just wowed the audience at Rutgers. And so it is that nations have become free when, on the one hand, released from the rule of individuals, groups, or other nations, and, on the other hand, governed by self-imposed laws and policies. Religion has become free when released from the domination of the state and governed solely by those precepts which it believes regulate man's relation to God, in either case the political or the religious. These have been certain stages. First, a time of almost utter subjection to the dominant power, then a time of bitter struggle, and the last day of liberation, when principles are untrammeled and practices self-govern. He believed in something that was called the culture of the democracy of culture, and to recognize the value of art and powers. So he had so much to say on that subject, but the trick for the fiction writer is how do you get characters who believe it and who will listen and act on it, or maybe if not even act on it, at least think about it a little bit more. And that was what he was able to do. The most humorous story he had relating to science was during the early days of the Depression. a young man was homeless, and he faked an illness, and he went to the Harlem hospital, pretending that he needed an examination. And the man said, "Okay, I will x-ray you." And he said, "Well, x-rays see inside the body, right? See inside the body." Skeeter is his name. He was in an unpublished story, which is in John Hay Library right now. Skeeter says, "Wait, if you can see inside my body, maybe you can see what I'm thinking with that x-ray machine." So he signs himself out of the hospital and finds some work elsewhere. So that's about the only time he used it, but I think we're indebted to him, Harlem Renaissance or not, in American literature, for the friendship shown, the ability to talk science, the ability to have, in a detective story, detective man and a scientist as good friends, to have the good and the old talk together without cutting one off from the other, to have the Southerner talk to the Northerner without the Northern urban person thinking the Southern person is backward. And so all these stereotypes, they crash in his best fiction. And I think for that, we ought to be grateful. So I would give him a hand. Thank you.
Professor is willing to take a question or two if you have one to pose.
If not, I'll tell you a story about Mrs. Fisher. Okay, yes.
I just wanted to know how much is in print. If we wanted to buy his stories, what do you recommend?
So see us afterwards. We have a form so that you can purchase City of Refuge, the collector's stores.
Good.
See me at the reception downstairs.
Can we also point out there's still unpublished stories? About 40 years ago, I went to John Hay and said, "Oh, you can publish any of these." And I've been publishing for 40 years and I haven't published one yet. So, did you hear what I said?
Yes.
You could go and publish some of the unpublished. There are all these things for us to do in this community.
Another question.
While you're waiting, I'll tell a quick story.
There's a question here from him.
Okay, I'm trying to get. Yes, please. Oh, yeah.
Gets in the ground in 1915, becomes an All-American, becomes a professional athlete, and he hops on a train from Chicago to come out here without knowing a single person in the city. It was such a brilliant person. Or people like Jesse Owens. Some of these guys were giants, and I just wondered if they ever touched base with the intellectuals.
Oh, yeah. Well, another connection between Robeson and here is that Pollard recruited Robeson, All-American football player, 6'3" and 220, as one of the toughest players in the United States. And so Fitz-Pollard is here and comes here, but check this. Fitz-Pollard is so good as an entrepreneur. He sells stocks. He becomes a theatrical agent and gets Paul Robeson his job in Emperor Jones. He does everything. Obviously a Renaissance man in the sense that he's versatile, can do a number of things, creative, and fearless, self-confident. All those work in this situation.
Tell your story. Tell your story.
Okay, it took a long time to find Mrs. Fisher, and everybody said she had passed away. And they were thinking about Pearl Rudolph Fear's sister. And I wasn't going to write a biography. I was interested in the story because I wanted him in lights, to go back up on stage with everybody else. But I was curious about the life that he lived and the domestic life that he had. He had a son named Hugh, who was born in 1926. Hugh died young, and his father introduced to him, because of a book that was very famous in 1926, here's the latest New Negro. New Negro was the title of the book, was a classic now, but with Alan Locke. So he calls his baby, this is the new Negro. So I call and I hassle people, and finally Woody King, who's a dramatist in New York, said, you might find her because we were contacted to do his play, to update his play, Conjure Man Dies. And, but we couldn't do it, we couldn't raise the money. But I think she lives in Liberty Town, Maryland. So you might try there. So I tried it, I fished around. Finally, I got her and we talked. And she said this, I knew I was gonna like her. She said, you gonna do a biography of him? I said, no, ma'am. I was careful to say ma'am. No, ma'am, I just want to do his stories. I love his stories, and I want the world to know his stories. She said, okay, because if you're going to just do a biography, the best advice I can give you is kill the widow. And she laughed like crazy. She laughed like, and I thought, and I knew what she was talking about, because the widow was going to protect her husband, dead husband, right? And I said, no, man, we're going to do that. But we got along very well. I learned that for some reason, Rudolph nicknamed her Jerry after I told her my middle son's name was Jerome. So every time she'd call me, she'd call in the middle of the day. I'd be at work. I said, Mrs. Fisher, I'm busy now. I'll get back to you. I said, no, you got to get this. I read it in the New York Times. She didn't read the New York Times. She was half blind. And she had a woman next door come over every day and read the New York Times to her. And she would memorize it, and if it was important, she'd say, it's important for your people to learn this, what is happening in this foreign country. It's what's happening here. And she was just stunning. So I had a chance to go to a Sunday dinner with her, and she said, no, you don't want to see this house, it's not this, it's not that. And no, it was neat as a pin. We had a great time and feasted. But down the road, after she passed away, in this small town, they would celebrate her birthday in the newspapers. And they would say, Miss Jane is 95, Miss Jane is 96, Miss Jane is 97, and if you get that close, my mother died at 99. You're rooting for the 100. Now, why do we do that? I don't know. But something about the magic 100 thing, And they said she died at 97, and the whole town was rooting for her to get to 100, right? Years later, I talked to her granddaughter, and I said she was a very feisty, spirited woman. She could tell jokes. She never felt sorry for herself or self-pity. And again, she's very feisty to be a woman of 97. And there's a pause in the conversation. And she said, 97? She was 107. And she said the only reason that she says 100 is, that 10 years off was that she was older than Rudolph was. And number two, she married after the point, at that time in history, women were to be married off, right? So she married late. And so she put it up. 107, I said, look, if I'm clear at 90, I'm happy. I'm happy. But she was an amazing woman. And she would talk about her and Rudolph going to speakeasies. And how he could go to speakeasies as a full-time physician and a student, I don't know. But this is the kind of things you see in the 1920s movie. Somebody walks through the door, knocks on the door, and a little peephole comes and sees an eyeball come in. She was shorter than he was, so he'd go up to the window and they'd see his eyeball and he would say something and they'd let him in. And they had a ball doing this. But, and this we talk about Du Bois living here close by. But she gave life to history. I mean, we sometimes read our history books. Well, if we don't watch, we might not have any history books. But sometimes our history books are very flat, and she was giving a three-dimensional position to the characters and the people who grew up in Harlem. And Fisher would always say, Harlem is not a ghetto. Harlem is not a slum. Harlem, like many communities, is trying to be a metropolis in a civilization. Now that's a high regard. He used the word civilization. So it was clear to me, it's always been clear to me, even when I read his first story, that he loved the people he was writing about. And for that, hands off again.